So music fans, and especially guitarist music fans, are an extremely opinionated group of people, and I'll include myself in that. People are always arguing about this band is better than that band, this guitarist is the best guitarist of all time, your favorite guitarist sucks and this is why, and blah 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 blah. And so, of course, the Allman Brothers Band and their whole sphere of influence, all the different musicians that have been associated with them over the decades, are not exempt from these kind of discussions of who's better. And within that world, I would say the most heated topic is who's better, Duane Allman or Derek Trucks. As someone whose top two favorite guitarists of all time are Duane Allman and Derek Trucks, I certainly have some thoughts on this debate. So that's going to be the topic of today's video. I'm going to dig into the nuances of the whole Duane versus Derek debate and discuss whether it even really makes sense to say one of them is better than the other. So let's get into it. Real quick before we get started, I just wanted to give you guys a heads up that I'm currently running a Black Friday sale on my slide guitar courses and my slide guitar bundle. I have a standard tuning slide course, a fretting behind the slide course, and a bundle of those two courses together at a discounted price. And for Black Friday, I'm doing a site-wide sale of 45% off on all three products. The sale ends at the end of the day on Cyber Monday, so don't miss out. Links are in the description down below to check out my courses. Thank you so much to anyone who decides to purchase them. All right, so when it comes to the Duane Allman versus Derek Trucks debate, I would say there are three main sort of camps. First, you have the kind of old head purist type people who are just 100% team Duane. This group mostly consists of your just straight up blues and classic rock fans, and their main argument tends to be something along the lines of Derek Trucks doesn't have enough soul in his playing. It's all technique, it's all technical stuff, but no feel. Whereas Duane's playing was more expressive and soulful. So that's the first group. Next, you have the team Derek Trucks people. This group is generally a little bit younger and is typically coming from more of the modern blues or modern jam band scene. Again, I'm very much generalizing here, by the way, but I would say that this group typically is going to be a big fan of Derek, of course, but they're not necessarily going to be anti-Duane. I've found that people who are more team Derek usually respect Duane and acknowledge his importance and influence, but find his playing to be a little bit antiquated and not really worth their time to fully dig into. Their sentiment is like, why would you focus on this older, simpler, more outdated thing when you have this amazing, newer, more advanced thing over here? So that's the second group. And finally, the third group is just everyone who loves both Duane and Derek's playing, which for the purposes of this video, we don't really need to focus on them too much because they just love it all and probably don't really care about this debate too much anyway. All right, so we have Team Duane and Team Derek. So where do we go from here? Well, I think what I want to do is just kind of break down different aspects of each of their playing one by one. So just kind of go by category like feel, chops, vocabulary, things like that. And try to, as objectively as possible, compare Duane and Derek's playing, as someone who is a super ultra mega fan and disciple of both of these guys. I definitely fit into that third category of people who love both Duane and Derek's playing, and I have very, very deeply studied both of them. And so while of course all art, music, everything is subjective, I feel like I can pretty effectively give an unbiased assessment of both of their playing. First, let's dig into what I would consider to be just the most obvious, objective, quantifiable category, which is chops and technique. When it comes to Duane, I would say for his time and the musical context that he was in, I would say his chops were very solid, especially when it comes to his sense of rhythm and time feel and just groove in his soloing. I feel like he was one of the absolute best of his era. You know, you take a song like You Don't Love Me, for example. With a groove like that, so many guitarists from that era, if they went to take a solo on that, they might have sounded something like this. Duane was one of the few soloists from that time who was really just playing just hard-hitting blues rock stuff while also having a good sense of rhythm and groove and time in his soloing. So on a song like that, he would have been doing something more like this. See, something like that just has so much more swing to it, and you can just feel the groove in it, while still having plenty of technicality to it. So in that sense, Duane's chops were excellent for his time. And of course, we have to talk about his slide playing, so I feel like with his slide playing, his style is so ubiquitous now that people don't necessarily think of it as being super advanced. But if you listen to any other slide player that came before Duane, including the ones that he was very influenced by, like Elmore James and Jesse Ed Davis, none of them match his precision and complexity of his slide playing. So I'll say it one last time. For his time, Duane had chops. But all of that being said, if you look at it objectively, compare them side by side, Derek Trucks just has more chops, more technicality, more precision to his playing. If you took present-day Derek Trucks and sent him back to 1971 and put him on stage with the Allman Brothers, he would absolutely smoke Duane when it comes to pure technical ability. Both slide and non-slide, Derek can just play faster, more intricate, more challenging things on the guitar more precisely than Duane ever could. And he could do it more consistently than Duane could. With Duane, keep in mind that he was only around 22 to 24 years old during his time in the Allman Brothers before he died, so I'm sure if he had lived longer, he would have gotten more consistent and just gotten better with his chops over time. Derek, on the other hand, has been playing guitar longer than Duane was even alive, and he just has a much more diverse and technically proficient foundation of influences to build off of than Duane ever did. So, not to take anything away from Derek's own talent and hard work that it took for him to get to where he's at, but given the circumstances, it does make sense that he is more technically proficient than Duane was. Still, overall, if you're just purely comparing each of their playing, Derek is the more technically skilled guitarist. All right, so the next category I would say is pretty closely tied to the previous one, and that is vocabulary and improvisation. By vocabulary, I just mean kind of everything under the umbrella of scale knowledge, interval knowledge, harmony, drawing from different styles of music, and just overall general music knowledge. And I put that together with improvisation because I feel like they kind of go hand in hand. So for Duane in this category, especially on the vocabulary side specifically, it's kind of complicated because I feel like it's hard to really know the depth of his musical knowledge, as well as just the way that he looked at music and the way that he approached the fretboard and things like that. And I feel like different examples of his playing almost suggest different levels of music knowledge. For example, we can definitely be sure that Duane had a deep understanding of traditional blues. Duane was a true student of the blues, of the real authentic thing, and that was the core of his playing. Outside of that, by listening to some of the less bluesy Allman Brothers songs, like say Blue Sky for example, I think it's pretty safe to assume that Duane at least had a decent knowledge of diatonic harmony. I don't know if he had a complete grasp on all of your typical music theory terms and things like that, but he definitely had an understanding of the major scale and to an extent the modes as well. On songs like Dreams and certain parts of Mountain Jam, he is most definitely and deliberately using Mixolydian. On In Memory of Elizabeth Reed and Whipping Post, he's definitely using Dorian. And for the most part, with maybe a couple exceptions, the chord progressions of all of those songs suggest their corresponding modes that Duane was playing in. So it seems that he understood that kind of thing on some level. Stylistically, like I said, the blues was kind of the core of his playing, but he was also getting some country stuff from Dickie, and throughout the span of his time in the Allman Brothers, he was digging more and more into jazz. So elements of those things were definitely getting into his playing, and you can most certainly hear it. I will say though, particularly with the jazz stuff, I feel like he didn't quite have enough time to really let that kind of thing sink in and let some of that vocabulary really get into his playing. Outside of just maybe using some of the modes and a little bit of chromaticism in there, it was more of just the kind of surface level stuff when it comes to his jazz influence. Again, I think if he had lived longer, then we would have heard more and more of that getting into his playing, but he just simply didn't have enough time to really dig in and study that stuff on a deep level. But all of that said, here's the thing with Duane. He was able to take that, solid but maybe not the most extensive vocabulary and really squeeze it for all that it was worth with his improvisation. Between the distinctiveness of his voice on the guitar and just his pure creativity, he was seriously able to make the absolute most of the music knowledge that he had. He was able to craft phrases that were, maybe not the most harmonically complex, but just so powerful, so definitive, and so unique. Duane and Dickey both were just so excellent at starting a motif in their solo, just making a statement with a phrase, and then repeating it, and then maybe expanding on it a little bit and altering it, and then coming back to it, repeating again, and then move on to a new motif and change up their dynamics, and just string together these phrases in a way that just perfectly builds a solo and tells a story. And all of that combined with the interplay of the entire band and just Duane's ability to take the band with him wherever he's trying to go makes Duane's improvisational instincts and skills just absolutely exceptional, just legendary. Some of the best improvisation in all of rock music, even with his limited vocabulary by modern standards. So there's Duane. Now moving on to Derek, he is most certainly drawing from a deeper vocabulary than Duane was. Just by listening to Derek, it's very obvious that he has a deep understanding of the blues, diatonic harmony, modal harmony, chromaticism, quartal harmony, like stacked fourths and stuff like that. He's had all of the same influences available to him to draw from that Duane had, as well as Duane himself. He's dug much deeper into jazz concepts than Duane was able to, especially when it comes to the Coltrane modal type stuff. And Derek has the entire Indian classical Pakistani music side of his playing that Duane just never had a chance to get anywhere near. So yeah, when it comes to all of that, plus his gospel side of his playing, Derek is definitely drawing from a deeper well when it comes to his vocabulary. Now, when it comes to the improvisation side of things, I honestly feel like most of the great things you can say about Duane's playing, you can also say about Derek's playing. Their approaches to improvisation are not exactly the same, but I would say that Derek has just as much creativity and inventiveness and uniqueness to his phrasing and his ability to craft a solo. I'd say Derek relies a little bit less on the kind of motif approach and just is a little bit more free-flowing with his improvisation, but still, he's very much able to create just powerful statements with his playing. Derek Trucks is without a doubt one of the absolute greatest improvisers of our time and possibly of all time. And so when you consider that, combined with the fact that Derek is drawing from a deeper vocabulary than Duane was, it makes sense that some people might find Derek's playing to have a little bit more variety and range to it than Duane's. But outside of that, when it comes to whose overall improvisational style you prefer, it really is just subjective. I don't think you can say one is necessarily better than the other. Now let's move on to the category of feel and soulfulness. So this is probably the most divisive topic when it comes to Duane versus Derek, particularly with people saying Derek is not as soulful as Duane was. And, to me, this is the most subjective category. I would say that feel and soulfulness is in the ear of the beholder. I'm not going to name any names, but there are certain well-known legendary guitarists out there that tons of people adore that I am not a big fan of their feel and don't think they have a ton of soul. And I'm sure every other guitarist and music fan has opinions like that, and that's perfectly fine. But when it comes to Duane and Derek specifically, if you ask me, both of them have some of the best feel and are some of the most soulful guitarists of all time. They're just different from each other. Generally speaking, Duane had a certain kind of looseness to his playing. Not in the sense that he was sloppy by any means, but there was kind of a looser, flowier thing going on with his phrasing and his feel, while still being relatively precise. Whereas Derek, relatively speaking, has a much tighter, more focused, I guess you could say kind of stiff feel. I feel like because Duane has that kind of looser thing going on, and Derek has that kind of more tight, stiff thing going on in his feel, I think that's what leads people to feel like Derek doesn't have as much soul as Duane does. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions, and that's fine, but for me personally, Derek's specific style of feel doesn't make him any less soulful. To me, Derek's sense of melody, his phrasing, his dynamics, his intensity and power, and his subtlety and delicateness all combines to make for an extremely soulful sound. So yeah, I can understand why Derek's approach might not be for everyone, but overall I think this is just a completely subjective topic and there is no right or wrong answer. For our last category, let's talk about influence. Now, when I say what I'm about to say, I promise I am not trying to take anything away from any of the other legendary slide guitarists who have come around the same era as Duane and after Duane. But I think it's safe to say that for the better part of 40 to 50 years or so, Duane Allman was the most influential slide guitarist. I feel like for a long time, Duane's playing got more people into slide than anyone else. And more players tried to emulate the Duane Allman slide sound than any other. Which, on a slightly unrelated tangent, is kind of interesting and funny and somewhat sad to me because there was so much more to Duane's playing than his slide playing. Slide was really a relatively small aspect of his playing. First and foremost, Duane was a regular fretted standard tuning guitarist. He really only played slide for the last 3 or 4 years of his life, and when the Allman Brothers played on stage, he played without a slide more than he did with a slide. And I think, honestly, most of his most creative, most visionary work was without the slide. And so while, of course, Duane's slide playing was absolutely legendary and groundbreaking and is the reason why I started playing slide in the first place, and is just the most influential aspect of his playing, it does bum me out a little bit that so many people miss out on everything he had to offer with his non-slide playing. That aside though, Duane's biggest impact was his slide playing, and I think he made the biggest impact of anyone for a long time with the slide. That being said, I feel like in the last probably 10 years or so, Derek Trucks has eclipsed Duane in terms of his influence on slide guitar. And again, just like Duane, Derek's fretted playing without the slide is also excellent and underrated, but again, Derek's slide playing is by far what most people know him for and what he's made the most impact with. And you know, when it comes to this topic, people like to make the argument of, oh well, without Duane there wouldn't be Derek. And while this is true, while Duane is an absolutely foundational influence on Derek Trucks, Derek has far exceeded just being another Duane Allman disciple. He has taken slide guitar to just an entirely new level that Duane would have never even fathomed, and has developed his own very unique voice on the guitar to the point that, in my opinion, he should no longer be beholden to the "he wouldn't be who he is without Duane" sentiment. There comes a point with every influential musician where they become more than just their influences and establish themselves as their own new thing. And Derek Trucks has very much earned that distinction, if you ask me. In addition to that, like I said before, I feel like in the last 10 years or so, we have entered a new era where more and more up-and-coming guitarists on the scene have Derek Trucks as their primary influence, or at least a primary influence. And while there are still plenty of older folks and younger folks who are super into Duane's playing, I think the number of players who are influenced by Derek Trucks primarily has surpassed the number who are primarily influenced by Duane. I'm just seeing more and more players like that coming up, and just whenever the topic of slide guitar comes up with anyone that I encounter in real life, the first name that they always say is Derek Trucks. So yeah, regardless of whether you prefer Duane or Derek or think one's better than the other, I think it's safe to say that the torch of most influential slide player has been passed to Derek Trucks. So now that we've covered everything, does it make sense to say that one of them is better than the other? Well, in my opinion, no. What it really comes down to for me is Duane Allman and Derek Trucks are just of different times. To me, when you're talking about anything music related or just anything, honestly, context is so important. The times and the circumstances that made Duane Allman and made Derek Trucks are just so different that you just can't even really compare them, if you ask me. Sure, you can discuss the differences in their playing like we have in this video, but as closely related and as closely intertwined as they are, Derek and Duane are just such different people and such different musicians that there just is no answer, if you ask me. There is no better or worse. There's only which one speaks to you the most. Everyone's going to have a different answer to that question, and everyone's answer is equally valid in this case. Lastly, what about me? Where do I stand in the Duane versus Derek debate personally? Well, like I said, these are my top 2 favorite guitarists of all time, and I have been massively influenced by both of them. And if we're talking on a purely technique level, I would say that I have definitely been influenced by Derek more. But when it comes to which one inspires me the most, which one moves me the most, I gotta say Duane Allman. All it really comes down to is just how his playing makes me feel. There are just certain moments in Duane's playing that literally will bring me to tears. It will literally make me emotional, make me well up, and no other guitarist, including Derek Trucks, does that for me. That doesn't mean I'm trying to say that Derek's playing isn't as emotionally expressive. It's just something about Duane's playing just gets to me every single time. There are plenty of people who say the same type of things about Derek, and I think that's excellent. I love that. But just for me personally, Derek's playing can get me close to that kind of emotional state, but there's just something about the vulnerability and beauty and nuance and just fieriness and power and aggression and youthfulness and gentleness and just, I don't know, there's something about his playing that I can't fully articulate that just does it for me more than any other guitarist ever. But yeah, that's just me. If Derek is the one that does that for you, then great. Or if it's any other musician, then awesome. That's the beauty of art and music. We're allowed to be inspired by whatever we want. And so yeah, at the end of the day, it's all just subjective and there is no better or worse. Derek is not better than Duane. Duane is not better than Derek. They're both amazing. They're both absolutely legendary guitarists. And yeah, ultimately, I think we should all just be grateful that both of these incredible musicians have been generous enough to bestow so much wonderful music onto all of us. All right, that'll do it for today's video. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on the whole Derek versus Duane debate. Don't forget that all of my slide guitar courses are on sale at 45% off through Cyber Monday. If you could please like, subscribe, and click the bell notification icon to get notified whenever I post new videos. It truly does help out my channel a lot. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.